8 years ago, the Royals were on top of the world. A lot has happened since then, and quite frankly, not a lot of it's been good in KC. Is there a reason to feel optimistic going to 2013 and beyond? We're bringing Rylan Stiles of Locked On Royals to break it down. This is a Locked On MLB, Locked On Royals crossover.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. If you don't believe me, look at my lower third, and you can call me Sully. I am an Emmy-nominated television producer who has been doing baseball podcasts for the last decade or so, and I am now beginning my fifth year. This is my fifth year as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network. That sounds bizarre, but that's true. I've been in 2019, 2020, 2021, 22. This is 2023. That's five for those of you keeping score at home. And you can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods, same handle for Instagram. And you can, I'm your pal Sully. Please follow me on Instagram at Sully Baseball Podcast. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On MLB. Or check out some of the other great shows on the Locked On Podcast Network, including, I'm just going to pick one at random, Locked On Royals with Rylan Stiles. And you know what? Rylan hasn't been on the show for a while, and it isn't because I have anything against Rylan. It's just, well, I don't know. This may sound a little harsh. It wasn't the best year to be talking Royals baseball, but you know what? This offseason, we're talking about every single team, and you never know what team is going to get it together, especially one which has some young players and maybe some hope for the future. Rylan, welcome back to the show, and welcome back to Locked On MLB.
Sully, thanks for having me back. I don't blame you for going on a Royals hiatus, but I'm glad to be back.
It is funny that sometimes I did the suffering index recently where I try to quantify fan bases that are suffering. And, based upon things like, years they've been waiting for a World Series, number of do or die games that they've lost since their last title. And I remember thinking like, wow, shouldn't the Royals have a smaller number because, they just won a World Series. And then I remembered, wait, no, that was 8 years ago. That was 8 years ago. And I'm not trying to rub anything in. It's just, it's when you get to a certain age, and I am of that age, like it seemed like a minute ago the Royals were celebrating at Citi Field. But not only have they not made the playoffs since then, they've had a series of 100 lost seasons and narrowly missed another one this last year. And what exactly is the mood in Royals land these days? Is there still some goodwill that has been some residue of goodwill based upon what happened, or is there a sense of, okay, that was great, let's get our act together here?
Yeah, it's the worst place to be in professional sports. The mood's apathy because the Royals are a terrible franchise. They've only had 2 playoff appearances in my entire lifetime. And right after winning a World Series, they went right back to the cellar. And now they're hitting up fans for about a new stadium and trying to push for a stadium vote, all while not investing money in the team, all while the team's not been very good. And while across the parking lot, the Kansas City Chiefs are having the highest success that you can have in professional sports, winning Super Bowls, contending every single year, going to every AFC title game since Patrick Mahomes became a starter. So whenever you have such a shiny item across your parking lot, literally, with the Kansas City Chiefs, no one really cares anymore about the Royals because even with that World Series title, even with that 2014 World Series run, the majority of almost everyone's lifetime has been just terrible baseball in Kansas City, and you now have something else to do with your free expenses and your free revenue to go as a person and go to a Chiefs game instead, or go buy Chiefs season tickets versus going to a couple Royals games a year. The trade off is just so different now, and I just think that truly it's apathy, and if it's not apathy, then it's anger. So like you either just don't care or you're upset with the team. So it's just not very good right now.
You're bringing up something here inadvertently that I brought up about some other teams, but you're almost perfectly encapsulating something that I absolutely feel. And I've said this before, and I think it completely um, applies to Royal fans who, lest we forget, have been to the World Series more frequently and more recently than some big ticket franchises like the Yankees. They've won as many titles in the last bunch of years as the LA Dodgers and some of the other big franchises. However, most of the years they are not putting a entertaining product on the field. And I've made this point many times, and what you're stating is critical. A baseball team's job is not to deliver a championship to their fan base. Their job is to deliver an entertaining summer to their fan base. And the Royals have been denying that year in and year out, save for those couple of years like a solar eclipse. Everything sort of lined up for a few years there. Basically 2013 where they were competitive, 2014 where they stunningly went to the World Series, and 2015 where they were a very good team in 2015 when they won the World Series, and then back to this. Um, it, you owe your fans at least the appearance or at least the attempt to put something on the field, especially when you're playing in a division like the American League Central, which doesn't have a financial behemoth, which doesn't have the equivalent of a Dodgers or a Mets or a Yankees or a Red Sox or one of these other teams that is just trying to gobble up as many players as humanly possible. It's a winnable division, and to not feel the contender in that, I think, is shameful.
It is, and the Royals squandered a great opportunity they did have. I mean, before this schedule change that's going to take place this year, where you're playing your divisional opponents less, the Royals were in the best spot in baseball in the sense of you got to play the AL Central every single year, and you never took advantage of it except for those two seasons where you ended up making the postseason. But yeah, it's just disappointing, and I think that the only thing that you can have positivity about is the fact that they're now trying to change their regime. And I do think that they made a right choice in letting go of Dayton Moore. I do think that they made the right choice in letting go of Mike Matheny. And I do think that this ownership group now, this starting this season, I've been saying that this season's really the start of this new ownership group. It's not whenever they officially bought the team a couple of years ago. It's right now, because now it's their people. It's their manager. It's their GM. It's their president of baseball ops. It's their everything. And we'll see if Mr. Sherman will operate the way that, say, Cleveland did, where he was from originally in that ownership group of Cleveland before coming to Kansas City. And the bottom line for me, and the most frustrating part for me, is that the Royals don't spend and they don't sign free agents, which is fine. I mean, it's the Royals, it's Kansas City. But then they also don't play Rays ball or don't play A's ball or Cleveland ball. Where they don't try to win in the margins. They don't try to make shrewd business decisions. They just try to have this happy-go-lucky family environment where they take care of their players and they don't watch porn in the locker room, and they just roll the ball out there and see what happens. And that's just, you have to be one or the other. You have to be a dramatic like spender that goes and adds talent, or a very calculated, methodical franchise that will let go of a fan favorite a year or two early to get back a guy who can be a fan favorite for 8 more years from then. And so they just weren't doing either one with Dayton Moore, and so Dayton Moore now is gone, and it's now up to the Royals to start acting like they're a small market team. They've been doing it financially. Now they've got to do it in terms of baseball ops.
If they get their act together in this division that they're playing in the way that they could make things compete, it's a surefire bet that a little bit of elbow grease could put them back in contention for a wild card spot. And if you're making any bets, go to Bet Online, which remains your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college football. Well, not much anymore. Better update the copy to basketball, and pretty soon we'll be having the March Madness, just a month and a half away from that. They've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, and if you're listening to me, chances are you do, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. You said a lot of things. Talk to us a little bit, because they one thing they did do. I was going to bring this up, and I'm glad you brought it up organically instead of me ham-fistedly asking you a question about it. Um, they did really turn the page from the 2015 season. Obviously, Dayton Moore was a huge part of assembling the team that won the World Series, but it's sometimes you need new blood, and sometimes you need to come from a different point of view. Tell us a little bit about the new GM and the new manager and your thoughts on them moving forward.
Yeah, so the new GM is actually JJ Picollo, who is working under Dayton Moore and close with Dayton Moore for the last 4 or 5 years. However, I've been quick to point out that just because you work under somebody doesn't mean you're going to be an exact carbon copy of them. Like there might
Mhm.
be many disagreements that JJ Picollo has had about how Dayton Moore does things, but Dayton Moore called the shots. So what are you going to do? You can voice your displeasure. You can't really do much whenever you're in that role. So let's give him a fair shot to see what he's all about and not just say he's going to be Dayton Moore Jr. Because I think if that was the case, then Sherman would just let them both go. And then as far as like hiring in Mike Curantino, I think that that's a great hire as a manager. I think that you bring him in. He's from that Rays culture. He understands how to get unorthodox and think outside the box, which the Royals have never hired a manager that thought outside the box and have never had a manager that would try new things and try to find those advantages in the margin, like having an opener, like having a piggyback starter, anything like that. So those are some edges that you can get, and they brought in Ryan Yarborough from Tampa Bay to assist Matty Q in this kind of first year here, and of course those two have a great relationship. I think that whenever you head into this off season, the only reason I defend this Royals organization is Royals fans, including myself, spent all last season saying fire Dayton Moore, fire Mike Matheny, fire Dave Island, fire the pitching coach, the manager, and the GM. All last season, that's what we were saying. And all last season, we were saying stop shoehorning in Hunter Dozier and Ryan O'Hearn and Ryan McBroom, play the young guys.
Mhm.
They got rid of Ryan McBroom. They got rid of Dave Island. They got rid of Dayton Moore. They got rid of Mike Matheny. So it'd be hypocritical to still sit up here and say this off season was a failure. They checked off all those boxes. Plus, they add Jordan Lyles and Ryan Yarborough, whatever the case is there. Who really cares about those two players
Right.
specifically? But they did what we were wanting them to do. All we wanted them to do last year was roll the young kids out there and see how good they are, and then you have to get a baseline of how good they are to then know your next steps. Do you now add to this roster, or are these young guys just not very good and you need to restart and go draft a new crop of young guys and hope that they pan out because these guys haven't? So I think that this offseason, despite it not being flashy, despite it not including a ton of acquisitions, I think it's a good start for the Royals and a good reset. And it's the first step toward a restep. It's the first step in clarity of which direction to go down. Because this season, they don't have any other arms to throw out there except for guys like Jackson Carr, except for guys like Daniel Lynch, except for these young arms that they've been stockpiling for the last three drafts. And they're either going to sink or swim. And if they swim, great. Then you take the next offseason and you start adding some veterans and seeing if you can make some noise in the wild card. And if they sink, then okay, next offseason you just strip this down to the studs and start another rebuild, but this time without Dayton Moore's fingerprints all over it.
I think you made a great point there in terms of one of the things that made this in some ways a quality off season for the Royals is an acknowledgement that you need to do something different. Is an acknowledgement that the status quo wasn't working, and that one of the things that happened to the Philadelphia Phillies when they went on a really terrific run at the end of the 2000s, the beginning of 2010s, where they won five straight division titles, back-to-back pennants, and won their second World Series in franchise history, the first time when they beat the Royals. Um, they stayed with their core and they stayed with their group of people that led them there too long. and it got to the point where it was like they were almost continuing to do victory laps for the same World Series. And by the time they were done doing the victory laps, the players didn't have any value, and the team was rudderless, and they had basically lost a decade. I mean, they didn't have a winning season between uh, Ryan Howard falling in a heap in at the end of the 2011 postseason and the COVID year. They didn't have a single season where they finished, above 500. And that's a lost time. You saw that since winning the World Series, since Wade Davis raised his hands in that bizarre extra inning win against the Mets, the Royals haven't been relevant. And so you're saying, and I agree with you, that they said, okay, we have to do something different now. Doing the same thing isn't going to get us where we want to do, and we can't keep taking the victory lap. And if nothing else is showing the Royals fans, all right, we're we we're going to go in a different boat now. We have to go in a different direction. I'll tell you something though. I will bring up 2015 again. I'm sure as a Royal fan, you don't mind listening to stuff about 2015. I was full disclosure. I didn't root for the Royals in 2014 because my dad, may he rest in peace, was a rabid Giants fan. I went to one of the games at um, it's now called Oracle Park. Then it was called AT&T Park, and I was thrilled by the result of that series. And full disclosure, I was not rooting for them against the Mets because I have so many friends who are Met fans, and I want them to do well. That being said, those Royal teams were thrilling because they seemed like they were a team from the 80s where there was a lot of stolen bases, a lot of people running around, transplanted in the you must go station to station, you must never run first to third, you must never steal a base. And it was great to watch. It was daring base running and everything. And quite frankly, I want to see more of that in baseball because do you know what that is? That's increasing the pace of the play. Pace of play does not equal the length of game. Pace of play is the pace of which a game is played. And those Royals games were thrilling. They were exciting. They were a brand of baseball that I wanted to see build upon that. And whatever they do, if they're going to emulate the A's, if they're going to emulate the Braves, if they're going to emulate the Cardinals, or whichever team they want to emulate, I hope it includes speed because baseball needs more speed. That speeds the game up.
Yeah, I think that the 2015 team, like you look back on paper and you can do some revisionist history of like, oh, these guys weren't any good because they weren't
They were
superstars.
great.
They
They were
weren't
terrific. They were terrific.
exactly. They weren't superstars. They weren't incredible 15-time All Stars when it's all said and done. Some of the guys only made one or two All Star games. Now looking back on their career, but you have to have lived in the moment and kind of go back and put yourself back in that spot. What they were doing was spectacular, and what they were doing was elite. They were elite at space running. They were elite at calculating when they're going to steal bases. Like Rusty Kuntz telling Linzer Kane to go first to home on a sloppy track in the rain because he knew that the Blue Jays outfielder couldn't make the throw home. So he just said, "Go ahead. I know you might slip. I know it's going to be dangerous. Go ahead. We trust your speed." Sending Hosmer on the mad dash because Lucas Duda can't throw to home. Like that stuff was calculated. It was reckless, but it also was calculated reckless of why they had a plan for why they were doing it and why they were causing chaos. And I think that was the last true baseball team in the sense of what you're talking about, of like kind of old school baseball. We are not just going for broke. I mean, the Royals couldn't go for broke. No one on that roster could hit home runs. No one on that roster could just outslug somebody. They had to keep the line moving. They had to hit 1 through 9. It took Alex Rios and Nori Aoki stepping up. It took Gerard Dyson swiping bases off the bench. It took Billy Butler getting a steal against Oakland. Like it was everyone had to do their part. And if somebody didn't, they weren't going to win. And yet still, they went wire to wire and won the AL Central. Yet still, they went to the World Series. Yet still, they won the World Series. Because even though they relied on every single player on that roster, one bad outing from Wade Davis, one bad outing from Kelvin Herrera, one bad outing from Edison Volquez, they don't win a game. They don't win a World Series. They don't win, in the postseason. They get beat by the Jays, get beat by the Astros. Like they could have lost every single series had one guy not done their job. And nowadays, you just sit on your hands and wait until your big slugger gets up there and pray to God he hits it over the fence. And it's not as entertaining to me.
There are three great points you made in there. First of all, the Royals team almost was eliminated in the division series in 4 games by Houston, they would have been totally forgotten. And in that wild card game, of which my heart was broken a little bit because became friends with one of the players on the A's that year, and so I went to many A's games in 2014, and really was hoping I could parlay that into
Right.
division series and ALCS tickets. Um, that the Royals twice were 2 outs away from being eliminated in the wild card game. They would have been totally for who remembers the wild card game loser, you know. And in each of those games, and in the Mets series, especially the Mets series, the point I'm going to make, but in that game against Oakland, where John Lester, a seasoned postseason winner, pitched into the 8th inning, um, and it was the base stealing. And the fact that he had trouble throwing to first, they knew that. And they just kept the carousel going, kept the pressure on them to the point where they chipped away. You saw the fact that the Astros knew that the Royals had this great speed, and so what that did was it put pressure on their defense, and Carlos Correa wet the bed, making a critical error that opened up the floodgates. And the pressure that it put on the Mets defense, Daniel Murphy making a critical error in game 4, the throw home where they knew, like, look at, if Hosmer was nailed at home, for those who don't remember what happened, the Mets were winning. And Matt Harvey pitched a phenomenal game until the ninth. And they brought in Familia. There was a runner on third with 1 out, just a ground ball to the third baseman, threw across the diamond, checked the runner so he didn't come home with a tying run. The throw went to first. Wasn't a wild throw. But as the throw went to first, Eric Hosmer immediately broke home, and the first baseman threw it to the catcher, but threw wild. If he threw a strike, Hosmer's out, and the game's over, and the series goes back to Kansas City. But having the Mets defense on their heels forced them to make errors, or forced them to rush plays, or forced them to panic. And that pressure put on them, you would never have in a team that is like, well, we've calculated the risk and it's not risk. The calculate the risk of Eric Hosmer running home. You don't send him. But you know what? Risk is fun. That was fun. And it was entertaining, and it wound up working. And I just think that we need to inject some of that into baseball. I know I shouldn't use the term inject because it brings up a lot of other images, but we talk about pace of play. Pace of play in so many ways is the pace of a game and the entertainment quality of a game. And whenever there's a runner on, again, forgive me if I'm rambling a little bit here. I'm old enough that I remember baseball in the 80s. Not everything was perfect there, but there were a lot of those speedsters. I talked about in the episode where I memorialized Chucky Carr, the Ricky Hendersons, the Tim Raines, the Otis Nixons, the Vince Colemans, the Willie McGee's, the Harold Reynolds of the world. When they're on base, the Willie Wilsons of the world, when the Brett Butlers of the world, when they're on base, Paul Molitor, when they're on base, everyone's watches it. When are they going to go? When are they going to go? Now the answer is never. And I think the Royals playing that type of baseball when nobody else was gave them an advantage. And one last point is, when you take a look at that team, was it an all time great team? No, but they had someone very good everywhere. Hosmer, Alcides Escobar, Mustakis, Lorenzo Kane, Gordon. None of the, Salvador Perez, none of them were the best, but they were all pretty good. And there was no glaring hole. Kendrys Morales, was he the best slugger? No, but he did the job. And for a team like the Royals, maybe that's how you build. You build through the farm or smart trades. Part of that came from Zach Greinke trades, but also part of it is, if we can't get someone great, let's make sure there's someone good there.
Right, and they built an elite bullpen. That was the only thing elite about their team,
Hmm.
was that and their speed. and then the rest is history. And again, like the teams just don't rely on all 25 and now 26 of their guys anymore. Like the Royals had Luke Hochevar, who was a failed first overall pick and a failed starter. They turn him into a sixth inning fireman that just comes in and somehow gets him out of a jam in the biggest stage in the brightest moments. They played Brandon Finnegan in 2014 in the World Series. 2 months after or I guess 6 months after, he pitched in the College World Series. He was pitching in the World Series of Major League Baseball. Like the storybook stuff that happened in Kansas City is only allowed to happen, on your point, because they weren't so attached to computer data points, because they weren't so, okay, Escobar, you can't swing at every first pitch. No, if it's working, just swing at every first pitch. And you know what? You end up hitting the first inside the park home run in World Series history since Babe Ruth. Go ahead and do it. First pitch of the game in the World Series, game number 1. Like nowadays, they would have never allowed Escobar to swing at every single first pitch. They just would have never allowed it. And it's just, some of it you have to trust your players, and you just have to trust that baseball is going to happen. The ball is going to hit off the bag and fly into left field, and that's going to be how you win the wild card game. Like at some point, baseball is going to happen. Don't just sit up there and wait around for what your computer program tells you to do.
We're here with Rylan Stiles of Locked On Royals. What a great phrase you said, baseball is going to happen. Because that's what the Royals were pushing then. And maybe, I will absolutely believe that one of the things that gave them that advantage was that there weren't other teams playing like that. So some of the teams that they were playing almost didn't know how to defend it. They didn't know how to react to the speed and the daring and the doing risk taking. But of course, you made the other great point. The Royals bullpen was outstanding. I mean, led by Wade Davis, and Holland was their closer for most of the year, and he was hurt. But like Davis stepped in when you had the lead at the 6th inning, it was over. But you also had good enough starters. And remember, the last World Series complete game was thrown by Johnny Cueto in Game 2 of the World Series against the Mets. But I think that's almost in a weird way should be a blueprint for the Royals moving forward, saying, look, if we get good players, and again, maybe reclamation projects like Hochevar, and say, hey, you get in the shot here, and you focus on building your team up through the farm. Bobby Witt Jr. could become a big star. Who are some of the names that you're hearing right now that could be the next, filling the spots of the Escobars and Mustakas and Kane and the Gordons who were so successful before? And of course, Salvador Perez has become Kansas City's answer to Yadi or Molina. I like that you still have one link to the World Series team, but who are some of the players that you're looking at as the building blocks?
Yeah, I mean, Bobby Witt Jr. was supposed to be everything that Julio Rodriguez was, everything that Ali Rushman was last year, and he had a nice season. I mean, but he just didn't have a superstar jaw-dropping season as a rookie. But there's still obviously a ton of hope for him.
He's 23, yep. Right? So yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, but who
MJ Melendez is another great guy that people love, and he's versatile. I mean, he can play DH, he can play outfield, he can play catcher. Like he can do a lot of different things. They have a logjam at first base for like Vinny Pasquantino's a left-handed bat at first base that is smooth and can really play that Hosmer role. Nick Prado is a nice slugger at first base that could play some third maybe down the line if you need to. And then you have some interesting pieces like Nicky Lopez, who's a slick fielding middle infielder that's only 27, almost 28 years old. Like, is he still going to be in your window whenever you're ready to compete? And then you just have a lot of guys that were highly touted and you just don't know where they stand, which is why I think it's so good that the Royals made this move and went to a ownership group, went to a general management group, went to a managing group, on the field that is going to allow them to play these youngsters. Because like Michael Massey could break out, Nick Eaton could break out, Kyle Isbell could break out. Those are 3, outfield, infield guys that could be something spectacular, could also be someone not worth messing with. But you have to find out which one it is. The biggest thing for Kansas City is the pitching. Yeah. They did kind of the inverse of what they did last time, which I think is a good strategy. I think that in Kansas City, if you can hit on 5, pitchers in the starting rotation, and if you can somehow get 1s, 2s, or 3s in the draft, that's so much more valuable than bats, because there's going to be a surplus of bats, and you can find some veteran bats who want to sign with you. I mean, Kendrys Morales was a huge boost to that lineup, and you don't win that World Series without Kendrys Morales in 2015. But you can't go find star ace pitchers in free agency. They're not going to sign with Kansas City. If there's an ace pitcher or even a number 2 pitcher on the market, in free agency, they're not even taking the phone call from Kansas City. So the only way you can get those kind of guys is from the draft. And they tried that. They tried drafting Brady Singer, who turned into an ace level pitcher. If you look at his numbers past June 1st, like if you look at June 1st on last year, you'd be
He was he
stunned. If you
was
did a blind resume test, you'd be
he was
stunned
very
how good
good.
he is.
Yeah, yeah. After certainly the second half of the season, he was terrific. You
He was
know,
awesome. And then you have like Daniel Lynch and Asa Lacy. Like Asa Lacy was supposed to be the first pick of his draft class, and he slipped to 5-6 where the Royals were, and they were able to grab him. But then you haven't heard anything from him since he's been in the minor league system. And so where is he standing? Is he even going to make it to a big league debut? Like there's a lot of interesting names, and what I think this shows is a point in the bad column because they've already shown it to you in the good column. I think that the other blueprint Kansas City has that other teams should take is on the trade market. You mentioned Johnny Cueto's name. I remember whenever they traded for Johnny Cueto and Ben Zobrist, two guys that they quite literally do not win the World Series without
no,
either one of those guys. Ben Zobrist was so huge in the regular season whenever Alex Gordon got hurt, and then also just playing electric baseball in the
yeah,
postseason and getting you over the hump. And Johnny Cueto, you mentioned the complete game in the World Series. Obviously, it goes without saying that they're going to win that game without Johnny Cueto. But they traded away an entire pitching staff. And I just got done talking about how important pitching is in small markets because you're not going to go sign them. And every single one of those pitchers, Brandon Finnegan had already played in the World Series. Everyone else was already minor league all-stars. I mean, John Lamb was incredible. Cody Reed was incredible. And none of them, besides Sean Manaea, has panned out in the big leagues. Sean
right.
Manaea has been really good. But you gave away one really good pitcher for a literal World Series. Out of the 5 all-star level minor league pitchers you gave up, and out of the 5 top 20 pitchers in your farm system you gave up, one of them panned out. And you got 2 players in return that both were pivotal in winning a World Series. So I think that with contending teams should just understand you just got to get into the dance into the playoffs, and then anything goes from there. Unlike other sports, like if you're the 8th seed in the NBA, you're not going to beat the 1 seed. Just who cares? But
Right.
in baseball, if you just get into the wild card game, the ball can bounce off the bag. A Gold Glove, superb defender in Carlos Correa can have a terrible error that then changes a whole series just because you're playing in the game. You could argue that the Royals have 2 of the most fluky World Series runs in consecutive years ever, and it's just because they got in the dance that happened. And without pushing all in, without making those trades and getting into the World Series, and I mean, I should say getting into the playoffs, you don't have the 2 best years in Kansas City baseball history in the last 50 years.
And also you take a you when you have a chance to get over the top, and I've been screaming this, and this is the sort of the Dombrowski point of view as he's with Philadelphia now. If you have a chance to bring it to the next level, prospects be damned. You have a chance to win. And you could have made a case for many of the players that were sent off for the Zobrist deal, for the Johnny Cueto deal, and you would make that trade 1 million times out of a million because lo and behold, it got him over the top. Last topic I want to talk about briefly. Way back when teams were building cookie cutter multi-purpose stadiums like Veteran Stadium, like Three River Stadium, Riverfront, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, RFK Stadium, Shea Stadium for that matter. Bush stadiums were designed to be the wrong shape for both football and baseball. A circular stadium is not perfect for baseball, nor is it perfect for football, but it's almost splitting the difference. And Kansas City at the Harry S. Truman Center, which I went to at a game in 1995 before it was refurbished, but it was still. They said, "What if we build a stadium perfectly designed for baseball right next to a stadium perfectly designed for football?" And lo and behold, all the other cities tore down their cookie cutter parks and built a football and baseball stadium there. And Kansas City said, "Yeah, you mean the thing we did, what you all should have done? You could have had the equivalent of Kauffman Stadium for the Phillies, for the Pirates, for the Cardinals, and all them, and they would not have been spending all this money." But lo and behold, all stadiums must face the music. And oddly, the Royals have one of the oldest stadiums in baseball now. There's talk about them wanting to build a downtown ballpark or something else. I happen to have loved Kauffman Stadium, at least when I was there, and it seems like a great place to see a ball game. Um, what's going on, and how realistic is the discussion of a new ballpark for the Royals?
Well, I think that the discussion is very, very real, and the team is even discussing it publicly at town halls and advocating for it. And I think it's something that the team really, really wants. And the thing is, even their parking lot partners with the Chiefs would love it if the Royals would move away because you knock down Kauffman Stadium and then the Chiefs just build this empire out there. I mean, the big thing right now is that when you drive out to Kauffman Stadium or Arrowhead Stadium, there's nothing out there except for the ballparks. And so if you knock out Kauffman Stadium, the Chiefs are going to put in restaurants, they're going to put in bars, they're going to put in
Mhm.
pop-up shops and everything else that you would want to entertain the Chiefs crowd. So they're not going to hold the Royals to whatever sort of legalities there is to put them in that sports complex. And the Royals want to go downtown where they're going to be in the midst of the downtown life that is now heavily increased in Kansas City. For those listeners that aren't around the Midwest area or around Kansas City, like their downtown scene is actually legit now, and it's why they're going to get a World Cup game, World Cup games in the next World Cup. I mean, it is a legit city at this point, and so there's a benefit there. For my personal take, I love Kauffman. I think that Kauffman is the best thing ever. From all your travels, Midwest people love parking more than anything, and they'll complain about paying for parking more than anything they'll ever complain about. I don't think that that's a good mix to go downtown. And whenever you have a literal stadium that's built upon acres of just straight parking lots, that's all that's out there. I think the trade off there is not great. And then just the actual stadium, it's comfortable. The actual stadium has great history and also has the great, it's a great stadium setup because you have the Hall of Fame out there where you can go and just get lost in Royals history. You have the fountains, you have the area out there for the kids to play in and kind of had a ton of entertainment options for kids. And then you just can watch the ball game also with great sight lines everywhere in the stadium and just great ticket pricing, everything. So ultimately, I think that this will happen, that they're going to move downtown to a downtown ballpark, and all that's left to hammer out is just how much taxpayers are going to pay for. But I think that Kansas City has the rare leverage point, given that they view themselves already as a major league city. They're not needing Major League Baseball to legitimize them. For example, if the Thunder come knocking for taxpayers to pay for a stadium in basketball in Oklahoma City, that's the only thing Oklahoma City can claim to make them a legitimized city. They're gonna just have to pay the piper. For Kansas City, they're getting World Cups, they're getting the NFL, they're getting the NFL draft, they're getting booming downtown nightlife, they're getting great concerts and great acts to perform in their city. The baseball is just kind of secondary. So if they ask for some outrageous amount, you could start seeing them flirt with leaving Kansas City. But ultimately, I think that this will just all be kaput like in a year or two from now, and they just work out whatever legalities it takes to work out building a stadium, and they build it in downtown Kansas City, and then we all kind of get over it in a couple seasons.
Yeah, I hope they work it out. I mean, again, look at I love Kauffman Stadium. It's funny, I for the book project I'm writing, I've had to read several biographies of Charlie Finley, and all the while he had been pushing Kansas City to build them a new ballpark for the A's, otherwise he was going to move. And so in many ways, if Finley was a little more patient, Kauffman Stadium would be the home of the A's right now. But alas, it's the home of the Royals, and the A's are trying to figure out their stadium situation. That's a whole other podcast, and maybe one I'll add you on if we want to talk about the round table. The Citizens Bank ballpark in Philadelphia should have been the ballpark of the A's because the A's should never have left Philly. Kauffman Stadium should have been the ballpark for the A's because maybe they should have left Kansas City, but now they're in Oakland, and who knows what's going to happen. But I know what's going to happen right now. I'm going to say thanks so much for Rylan Stiles for joining the show, and I wanted to say thank you all for making Locked On MLB your first listen every day. Your second listen, obviously, have that be Locked On Royals. Your third listen, make that be Locked On MLB Prospects with host Lindsey Crosby. He's a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the major league stars of tomorrow. How many of them will be playing for Kansas City? It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Speaking of podcasts, Rylan Stiles, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Rylan_Styles. Follow the show on Twitter at Lockdown Royals, and subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast from. Sully, thanks for having me.
Yes, and thanks so much. And you can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods. Same handle on Twitter and on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram at Sully Baseball Podcast. And be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube as we're looking to meet our goal of 1 billion subscribers. We've fallen several hundred million short of that. So let's pick it up. We're going to try and make it 1 billion subscribers. This has been a Locked On MLB, Locked On Royals crossover for today, the 20th day of January, 2023. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.